Michael thought he had the perfect life with his wife, Laura, until he stumbled upon the shocking truth of her infidelity. What begins as a gut-wrenching betrayal spirals into a tense journey of confrontation, emotional revelations, and difficult choices. As the cracks in their marriage deepen, Michael faces questions of trust, love, and whether their relationship can survive. Along the way, secrets come to light, confrontations escalate, and the stakes rise higher than ever. Can this couple rebuild what was shattered? Or is it too late to save their family? Watch this gripping tale of betrayal and resilience unfold. The scene begins in a quiet suburb, a serene neighborhood with perfectly trimmed lawns and identical houses, each one hiding its own secrets. The story centers on Michael and Laura Bennett, a couple who had always been the epitome of stability. Or so it seemed. Michael, a history professor at a local college, had a quiet but commanding presence, the type of person who could command a room with just a look. Laura, his wife of 12 years, was a freelance graphic designer known for her creativity and warmth. Together, they had built a life that seemed almost picture-perfect. Michael and Laura's home was the heart of their lives. They had 2 children, Emma and Jake, who filled the house with laughter and the occasional chaos that came with raising young kids. Weekends were for family breakfasts, trips to the park, and movie nights. Their relationship had once been defined by love, mutual respect, and shared dreams. But over time, the little cracks began to form. Cracks that neither of them seemed willing to acknowledge. The story begins one autumn morning. Michael sat at the breakfast table, scanning the headlines on his tablet while Emma and Jake argued over the last piece of toast. Laura moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, pouring coffee, packing lunches, and juggling her freelance deadlines. It was a scene they had repeated countless times, but something felt different to Michael that day, an unspoken tension that lingered in the air. Michael's gaze lingered on Laura longer than usual. She looked the same as always, her auburn hair tied back in a loose bun, her face devoid of makeup, yet still beautiful in its simplicity. But there was a distance in her eyes, something he couldn't quite place. He brushed it off, convincing himself it was just another busy morning. Later that day, Michael sat in his office at the college, going through a stack of essays. His phone buzzed with a notification, a text from Laura. It was a simple message, letting him know she'd be working late at a coffee shop downtown. Michael frowned. It wasn't unusual for Laura to work outside the house, but something about the tone of her message felt off. He couldn't explain it, but a small knot of unease settled in his stomach. As the weeks went on, Michael couldn't ignore the changes in Laura's behavior. She seemed distracted, her laughter less frequent, her phone always close at hand. When he asked her about it, she dismissed his concerns with a tired smile, blaming her workload and the demands of managing their home. Michael wanted to believe her. He wanted to trust the woman he had built his life with. But doubt began to creep in, feeding on the small inconsistencies and unexplained absences. One evening, while Laura was out working late again, Michael decided to go for a walk. The crisp autumn air did little to calm his restless mind. He found himself wandering downtown, the streets lit by a golden glow from the streetlights. As he turned a corner, he spotted Laura sitting by the window of a coffee shop, her face illuminated by the soft glow of her laptop screen. Relief washed over him. She was exactly where she said she'd be. But then Michael saw something that made his heart sink. A man approached Laura's table, placing a hand on her shoulder as he leaned in to speak. Laura smiled at him, a smile that Michael hadn't seen in months. They exchanged a few words before the man sat down, their conversation flowing easily. Michael stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching the scene unfold through the glass. He didn't recognize the man, but the familiarity between him and Laura was undeniable. Michael walked away, his mind racing. He didn't want to jump to conclusions. but the image of Laura and the stranger replayed in his head like a broken record. That night, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Laura's smile, the way she leaned toward the man, the ease in their interaction. The next morning, Michael confronted Laura. He tried to keep his tone calm, but the tension in his voice was unmistakable. He asked her about her night, about the man she had been with. Laura's face froze for a moment before she laughed it off, calling him paranoid. She claimed the man was a client, a simple misunderstanding. Michael wanted to believe her, but the knot in his stomach tightened. He knew Laura too well to ignore the flicker of guilt in her eyes. Days turned into weeks, and the distance between Michael and Laura grew. Their once effortless conversations became strained. Filled with half-truths and unspoken accusations, Michael found himself questioning everything. Every text Laura sent, every late night at the coffee shop, every excuse she gave. He began to dig for answers, searching for proof that his suspicions were either valid or unfounded. One evening, while Laura was out, Michael sat at the kitchen table with her laptop. He hesitated before opening it, guilt gnawing at him, but his need for answers outweighed his conscience. He scrolled through her emails, finding nothing unusual at first, but then he stumbled upon a series of messages exchanged with someone named Chris. The tone of their conversation was casual, but laced with a familiarity that set Michael on edge. Michael's heart raced as he read through the messages. They spoke about meeting up, shared inside jokes, and reminisced about moments that didn't involve him. He felt like an intruder in his own life, reading the words of a man who seemed to know Laura in a way he no longer did. When Laura came home that night, Michael was waiting for her. He confronted her again, this time with the emails as evidence. Laura's face turned pale, her composure cracking under the weight of his accusations. She tried to deny it at first, claiming Chris was just a friend, but as Michael pressed her, the truth came tumbling out. Laura admitted to meeting Chris during one of her freelance projects. She insisted their relationship had started innocently, but over time, it had crossed boundaries she never intended to break. She swore it hadn't gone beyond emotional intimacy, but Michael struggled to believe her. The betrayal cut deep, leaving him questioning everything they had built together. Michael didn't know what hurt more, Laura's actions, or the realization that their marriage had been unraveling for far longer than he wanted to admit. The trust they had once shared was gone, replaced by doubt, anger, and a deep sense of loss. Michael felt like his world had been flipped upside down. Laura's confession had only scratched the surface of what he feared might be the full truth. She insisted it was an emotional connection, and nothing more. But Michael couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't telling him everything. The emails between Laura and Chris were too familiar, too intimate to be purely platonic. Despite her promises to cut ties with Chris and work on their marriage, the foundation of trust was crumbling beneath them. As the days passed, Michael found himself becoming someone he didn't recognize. He started tracking Laura's movements, rationalizing his behavior as necessary to protect himself from further betrayal. Every time Laura's phone buzzed, Michael's heart sank. He hated feeling this way, like a man obsessed. But the doubt consumed him. One evening, as Laura worked late in her home office, Michael sat in the living room scrolling through his phone. A notification popped up from an app he didn't recognize. Curious, he realized it was connected to the family tablet, which the kids rarely used. He clicked it open and froze. The app was linked to a location sharing feature, and it showed Laura's device in a part of town where she had no reason to be. Michael hesitated, debating whether to confront her immediately or investigate further against his better judgment. He grabbed his coat and keys, deciding to see for himself what was happening. Driving through the dimly lit streets, his mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. He parked a block away and approached the address cautiously. It was a small, upscale restaurant, the kind of place Michael and Laura used to frequent on special occasions. Through the window, he saw Laura seated at a table near the back. She wasn't alone. Opposite her sat Chris, his hand resting lightly on hers as they leaned in close, sharing a private moment. Michael's chest tightened as he watched the interaction. This wasn't just a friendship, it was something much more. He turned away, unable to stomach the sight any longer. The betrayal he had tried so hard to rationalize was now undeniable. When Laura returned home that night, Michael was waiting. The confrontation was explosive. Michael accused her of lying about cutting ties with Chris, demanding the truth. Laura's defenses crumbled, and she admitted that her relationship with Chris had progressed further than she had originally confessed. It hadn't just been emotional. She had crossed the line physically as well. Michael felt like the ground beneath him had vanished. The woman he had loved and trusted had betrayed him in the most intimate way. He demanded answers, desperate to understand why Laura's explanation was fragmented and emotional. She spoke of feeling neglected and unfulfilled, of longing for excitement and connection that she felt had been missing in their marriage. "You were always so focused on work, Michael," she said, her voice trembling. "I felt invisible, like I was just another piece of furniture in the house. Chris made me feel seen again." Her words stung, but they also forced Michael to confront a hard truth. He hadn't been as present in their relationship as he thought. While he had been providing stability and structure, he had neglected the emotional intimacy that Laura craved. But even understanding her reasoning didn't erase the betrayal. The pain of her actions overshadowed any efforts to rationalize or forgive. Michael told Laura he needed space to process everything. For the first time in 12 years, he packed a bag and left the house, seeking refuge at a friend's place. While staying with his friend, Michael began to reflect on his own role in the breakdown of their marriage. He wasn't excusing Laura's actions, far from it, but he couldn't ignore the ways in which he had contributed to their growing distance. At the same time, he couldn't shake the anger and resentment that had taken root in his heart. He knew their marriage would never be the same, no matter how much they tried to repair it. Meanwhile, Laura was left to face the consequences of her actions. She confided in a close friend about what had happened, seeking advice on how to move forward. Her friend didn't sugarcoat the situation, telling Laura that regaining Michael's trust would be a long and difficult journey, if it was even possible at all. Laura felt a deep sense of regret, but also a determination to prove that she was willing to fight for their marriage. Over the following weeks, Michael and Laura engaged in several tense conversations, each one filled with a mixture of anger, sadness, and longing. They agreed to try counseling, though Michael remained skeptical about whether it could truly save their relationship. In therapy, they began to unpack years of unresolved issues, Michael's emotional distance, Laura's feelings of neglect, and the ways they had both failed to communicate their needs. The sessions were painful, but revealing. Michael learned to express his emotions more openly, while Laura confronted the deeper insecurities that had led her to seek validation outside their marriage. Slowly, they began to rebuild the foundation of their relationship, though the process was far from easy. Chris, however, remained a looming presence in their lives. Michael couldn't shake the fear that Laura still harbored feelings for him, despite her assurances to the contrary. One day, Michael made a bold move. He confronted Chris directly. He found him at a coffee shop and introduced himself calmly but firmly. The conversation was tense, with Chris initially trying to downplay his role in the affair, but Michael made it clear that he wasn't there to negotiate. "Stay away from my wife," Michael said, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "If you care about her at all, you'll give her the space to fix what she's broken." Chris seemed taken aback, but ultimately agreed, promising to cut off contact with Laura. Whether he would keep that promise, only time would tell. Back at home, Michael shared the encounter with Laura. She was upset at first, feeling that he had overstepped by confronting Chris. But as they talked, she realized that Michael's actions came from a place of love and a desire to protect what was left of their marriage. It was a turning point for both of them, a moment where they began to truly understand each other's pain and perspective. The road to healing was long and filled with setbacks. There were days when the weight of the past threatened to pull them apart, but there were also moments of hope, small victories that reminded them of the love they once shared. They leaned on their counselor, their friends, and each other, slowly piecing their relationship back together. In the end, Michael and Laura's story wasn't about perfection or fairy tale endings. It was about resilience, growth, and the hard work of rebuilding trust. They knew there were no guarantees, but they were willing to try, to fight for the life they had built and the family they loved. Thank you for staying with us through this gripping journey. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more compelling tales that explore the highs and lows of human relationships. Share this video with someone who might relate, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Michael and Laura's attempts at reconciliation were fraught with tension. Each conversation seemed to bring them closer to understanding each other, only to be followed by an argument that pushed them further apart. While therapy provided a framework for healing, the wounds of betrayal ran deep. Michael struggled with the constant nagging thought of whether he could ever truly trust Laura again, while Laura grappled with the immense guilt of her actions. One evening, after another exhausting therapy session, Michael sat alone in the living room, flipping through an old photo album. The pictures told the story of their life together, their wedding day, the birth of their children, vacations filled with laughter. He couldn't reconcile the woman in those photos with the one who had betrayed him. But amidst the pain, there was still a flicker of hope. He wanted to believe that they could find their way back to each other, but the question of Chris still loomed over them like a dark shadow. Laura had promised to cut all ties with Chris, yet Michael couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something she wasn't telling him. He decided he needed closure, not just for himself, but for their marriage. Without telling Laura, Michael began digging deeper into her interactions with Chris. He went back to the email thread he had discovered earlier, this time scrutinizing every detail for clues. One message stood out. It wasn't particularly explicit, but there was a reference to a meeting place, a cabin just outside of town. Michael's heart pounded as he read the words over and over. He knew he was crossing a line by invading Laura's privacy, but he couldn't stop himself. He had to know the full truth, even if it meant uncovering something he wasn't ready to face. The next weekend, while Laura took the kids to her mother's house, Michael drove out to the address mentioned in the email. The cabin was secluded, nestled deep in the woods. It looked unassuming, but Michael couldn't help but feel a chill as he approached. The door was locked, but a quick glance through the windows revealed signs of recent activity. Coffee mugs on the counter, a blanket draped over the couch. Someone had been here recently. Michael's mind raced with possibilities. Had Laura met Chris here? Was this where their affair had taken place? The thought was almost too much to bear. He took a few photos of the cabin and its surroundings, determined to confront Laura with what he had found. When Laura returned home later that evening, Michael wasted no time. He showed her the photos, his voice trembling with anger and hurt as he demanded an explanation. Laura's face went pale as she recognized the cabin. She admitted that it was a place she and Chris had visited during their affair, but insisted she hadn't been there since ending things with him. "You have to believe me, Michael," she said, tears streaming down her face. "It's over. I made a terrible mistake. But I'm trying to make things right." Michael wanted to believe her, but the pain of her betrayal was too fresh. The discovery of the cabin felt like a betrayal all over again, reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal. He told Laura he needed time to process everything and left the house, unsure of where to go or what to do. As the weeks passed, the tension between Michael and Laura only grew. Therapy sessions became more confrontational, with both of them airing grievances that had been buried for years, Michael accused Laura of prioritizing her own needs over their family, while Laura pointed out the ways Michael had emotionally withdrawn from their marriage long before her affair began. It was during one particularly heated session that Laura dropped another bombshell. She revealed that Chris had tried to contact her again, despite her efforts to cut him out of her life. Michael's fury was immediate, but Laura assured him that she hadn't responded to Chris's attempts. Still, the revelation was enough to send Michael spiraling. He began to question whether Laura was truly committed to repairing their marriage, or if she was still holding on to her feelings for Chris. In the midst of all this turmoil, Michael made a decision that would change everything. He contacted Chris directly, arranging a meeting to confront him once and for all. Michael didn't tell Laura about his plan, knowing she would try to stop him. He needed answers, and he needed them from the man who had been at the center of his wife's betrayal. The meeting took place at a local park, in a quiet corner away from prying eyes. Chris arrived looking confident, almost smug, which only fueled Michael's anger. The conversation was tense, with Michael demanding to know why Chris had pursued Laura despite knowing she was married. Chris didn't deny his actions. In fact, he seemed almost unapologetic, claiming that his connection with Laura had been mutual and genuine. But as the conversation continued, it became clear that Chris had little regard for the damage he had caused. He dismissed Michael's pain as collateral damage, painting himself as a victim of circumstance rather than a willing participant in an affair. Michael left the meeting feeling more betrayed than ever. It wasn't just about Laura anymore. It was about the profound disrespect Chris had shown for their marriage and their family. For the first time, Michael felt a surge of clarity. He realized that his focus needed to shift. Instead of dwelling on the past, he needed to decide what kind of future he wanted, whether that future included Laura or not. Back at home, Michael and Laura had their most honest conversation. Yet Michael told Laura about his meeting with Chris and the feelings it had stirred in him. He spoke about his anger, his hurt, and his deep sense of betrayal. But he also spoke about his hope, the hope that they could rebuild their marriage if they were both truly committed to making it work. Laura listened intently, her own emotions bubbling to the surface. She admitted that she had been selfish and reckless, but she also spoke about her love for Michael and her desire to heal the wounds she had caused. For the first time in months, they seemed to be on the same page, both acknowledging the pain of the past while tentatively looking toward the future. They agreed to take things one step at a time, focusing on rebuilding trust and communication. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. For the first time in a long time, Michael felt a glimmer of hope, not just for their marriage, but for himself. Thank you for staying with us as this story unfolds. If you've been captivated by this journey, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more compelling stories. Share this video with someone who might find it meaningful, and let us know your thoughts below. Michael and Laura's fragile truce was put to the test as the days went by. They were trying to rebuild their lives, but the past was always lurking just beneath the surface. Every small disagreement felt like a potential disaster, a reminder of the immense betrayal they were trying to overcome. But the tension reached a boiling point one night when an unexpected email arrived in Laura's inbox. The email was from Chris. Its tone was casual, almost dismissive, as if he hadn't been the source of months of turmoil. Michael discovered the message by accident while helping Laura organize her work emails for a project. The moment he saw Chris's name, his heart dropped. He read the email aloud, his voice trembling with barely controlled anger. Chris's message wasn't explicitly romantic, but it was clear he was trying to re-establish contact. He mentioned unfinished business and asked Laura to meet him at the cabin, the same cabin that had already caused so much damage to their marriage. Michael turned to Laura, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and despair. "Did you know about this?" he asked, his voice cold and accusing. Laura shook her head vehemently. No, Michael, I haven't spoken to him. I swear I didn't know he'd reach out again. But Michael's trust was already fragile, and this was the breaking point. The email felt like proof that Chris still held some power over their lives, and Michael couldn't handle the thought of Laura entertaining even the slightest contact with him. We're done talking about this, Michael said, standing abruptly. I need to clear my head. Before Laura could respond, he grabbed his coat and left the house, slamming the door behind him. Michael drove aimlessly for hours, his mind racing. He couldn't escape the images of Laura and Chris together, the lies and half-truths that had defined their lives for so long. He thought about the cabin, about the email, and about the man who had caused so much pain. Michael knew he couldn't keep living like this, trapped in a cycle of suspicion and resentment. Finally, he made a decision. He wasn't going to let Chris continue to manipulate their lives from the shadows. He would put an end to it, once and for all. The next day, Michael confronted Laura with a plan. He wanted them to respond to Chris's email, agreeing to meet him at the cabin. But instead of Laura going alone, Michael would go in her place. He wanted to face Chris directly, to expose his manipulative tactics and put an end to his interference. Laura was hesitant at first, worried about what might happen if things got out of hand. But Michael's determination was unshakable. He assured her that he wasn't looking for a fight. He just wanted to protect their family and their future. Reluctantly, Laura agreed, drafting a reply to Chris's email under Michael's guidance. The response was carefully worded to avoid suspicion, agreeing to meet Chris at the cabin later that week. Michael knew he was taking a risk, but he felt it was the only way to regain control of the situation. When the day of the meeting arrived, Michael drove to the cabin alone. The secluded location felt even more ominous this time, the silence of the woods amplifying his nerves. He parked his car a short distance away and approached the cabin on foot, careful to stay out of sight. Through the window, Michael saw Chris already inside, casually sipping a cup of coffee, as if he had no idea the storm he had created. Michael's anger flared, but he forced himself to stay calm. He knocked on the door, and Chris looked up, clearly surprised to see him instead of Laura. Michael, Chris said, his tone smug. This is unexpected. Michael stepped inside, his expression unreadable. I think it's time we had a talk. What followed was a tense confrontation that felt like it had been building for months. Michael laid everything on the table. Chris's manipulation, the pain he had caused, and the damage he had inflicted on Michael's marriage. Chris, for his part, didn't deny his role in the affair, but he showed no remorse. You know, Chris said, leaning back in his chair, Laura came to me because she was unhappy. If you had been a better husband, maybe none of this would have happened. The words hit Michael like a punch to the gut, but instead of lashing out, he stood his ground. I'm not here to play the blame game, Michael said, his voice steady. I'm here to tell you that this ends now. You stay out of our lives, or I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who you are and what you've done. Chris smirked, clearly unbothered by the threat. You think you can scare me, Michael. I've got nothing to lose. Michael leaned forward, his eyes locked on Chris. Maybe not, but I do, and I'm not letting you take it from me. The confrontation ended with Chris agreeing, reluctantly, to leave Laura alone, but Michael knew better than to trust his word. He left the cabin feeling both relieved and unsettled, knowing that the real challenge would be rebuilding his marriage in the wake of everything that had happened. Back at home, Michael told Laura about the confrontation. She listened intently, her face a mix of gratitude and guilt. She apologized once again for the pain she had caused, vowing to do whatever it took to earn Michael's trust. For the first time, Michael felt like they were truly on the same page, united in their desire to move forward. But the road ahead wasn't easy. The scars of betrayal didn't fade overnight, and both Michael and Laura had to confront their own flaws and insecurities. Therapy sessions became a place for honest reflection, and slowly but surely, they began to rebuild the foundation of their relationship. One night, as they sat together on the couch, Michael turned to Laura and asked, "Do you think we'll ever get back to where we were?" Laura hesitated, then shook her head. "No," she said softly. "But maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe we can build something stronger." Michael nodded, realizing she was right. Their marriage would never be the same, but it could still be something worth fighting for. Thank you for following along as this gripping story reaches its most intense moments. If you've been hooked by the twists and turns, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that dive deep into the complexities of relationships. Share this video with someone who might relate, and let us know your thoughts below. Michael's confrontation with Chris felt like a small victory, but the unease lingered. Though Chris had agreed to stay away, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that his presence still loomed over their lives. It wasn't just about Chris anymore. It was about the cracks in his marriage that had allowed someone like him to come between them. Those cracks weren't going to repair themselves overnight. For Laura, the aftermath of the confrontation was a wake-up call. Seeing how far Michael was willing to go to protect their family made her realize the depth of the pain she had caused. She threw herself into rebuilding their relationship, focusing on open communication and transparency. She deleted Chris's contact information, blocked him on every platform, and even changed her email address to ensure there was no way for him to reach her. But as much as she wanted to move forward, she couldn't ignore the guilt that weighed heavily on her. One evening, while Michael was putting the kids to bed, Laura sat at the dining table, staring at the blank page of a journal. Their therapist had suggested journaling as a way to process her emotions, but Laura didn't know where to begin. Her thoughts were a jumble of regret, shame, and hope. After several minutes of hesitation, she began writing. "Dear Michael," she started, unsure if he would ever read the words. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to make up for the pain I've caused you, but I want you to know how deeply sorry I am. You didn't deserve this. You've been a good husband, even when I didn't appreciate it. I don't expect forgiveness overnight, but I hope we can find our way back to each other." As she wrote, tears streamed down her face. For the first time, she allowed herself to fully acknowledge the damage she had done, not just to Michael, but to their entire family. She closed the journal and placed it on the bookshelf, a private reminder of her commitment to making things right. Meanwhile, Michael was struggling with his own emotions. The confrontation with Chris had brought a sense of closure, but it also left him grappling with the question of whether he could truly forgive Laura. He wanted to, for the sake of their children and the life they had built together. But the betrayal was a wound that refused to heal. One night, while sitting alone in the living room, Michael received a phone call from an unknown number. He hesitated before answering, his heart racing with anxiety. On the other end of the line was Chris. "I know I said I'd stay away," Chris began, his tone unusually somber. "But there's something you need to know." Michael's grip on the phone tightened. "What could you possibly have to say to me?" Chris sighed. "Laura didn't tell you everything. She's been trying to protect you, but there's more to the story than you realize." Michael's blood ran cold. He didn't want to believe Chris, but the doubt had already crept in. Before he could respond, Chris hung up, leaving Michael with more questions than answers. The next morning, Michael confronted Laura. He told her about the phone call, demanding to know if there was any truth to Chris's claims. Laura looked panicked, her hands trembling as she tried to explain. "I didn't want to hurt you any more than I already had," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There were things I didn't tell you because I thought they didn't matter, but maybe I was wrong." Michael's patience was wearing thin. "What didn't matter, Laura? What are you still hiding from me?" With tears in her eyes, Laura confessed that her relationship with Chris had started long before she admitted she had initially downplayed the extent of their connection, hoping to spare Michael the full truth. But now, as she saw the hurt in his eyes, she realized that her attempt to protect him had only made things worse. Michael felt like the ground was slipping out from under him. The trust they had been working so hard to rebuild was shattered once again. He left the house without saying another word, driving aimlessly as he tried to process what he had just learned. The following days were some of the darkest Michael had ever experienced. He avoided Laura, choosing to stay late at work or spend time with friends instead of coming home. He felt like he was drowning in a sea of anger and betrayal, unsure if he had the strength to keep fighting for their marriage. Laura, on the other hand, was determined not to give up. She wrote Michael a letter, pouring her heart onto the page. She admitted to her mistakes, acknowledged the pain she had caused, and expressed her unwavering love for him. She left the letter on his nightstand, hoping it would reach him in a way that words couldn't. When Michael finally read the letter, something shifted. It didn't erase the pain, but it reminded him of the woman he had fallen in love with, the woman who was now fighting to save their marriage. He realized that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting what had happened. It was about choosing to move forward despite the pain. Michael and Laura had one final breakthrough during a therapy session. Their counselor asked them to write down their biggest fears and share them with each other. Michael confessed that he was afraid of being hurt again, of opening himself up only to be betrayed once more. Laura admitted that she was terrified of losing the family they had built together. For the first time, they truly saw each other's pain. It was a turning point, a moment of vulnerability that allowed them to begin the slow process of rebuilding their trust. In the weeks that followed, Michael and Laura worked together to create a new foundation for their relationship. They established boundaries, practiced open communication, and made a commitment to prioritize their marriage above all else. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of doubt, but they were finally moving in the right direction. Thank you for following along as this story reaches its most intense moments. If this journey has resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the complexities of love and redemption. Share this video with someone who might find it meaningful, and let us know your thoughts below. Michael and Laura's relationship was hanging by a thread. The revelations had left them both emotionally drained, but neither was willing to make the final decision to walk away. There was a silent understanding between them. This was their last chance to salvage what was left of their marriage. The stakes had never been higher. Michael decided to take a step he had been avoiding, seeking advice from his best friend, Daniel. Over beers at their favorite pub, Michael laid everything out on the table. Daniel listened intently, his usual carefree demeanor replaced by genuine concern. "Look, man," Daniel said after a long pause, "it's clear you still love her. But love isn't enough if you can't trust her. You have to figure out if you can forgive her and move forward, or if this is always going to haunt you. Because if you stay, you have to stay fully. Halfway won't cut it." Michael nodded, knowing Daniel was right. He had been teetering on the edge, unsure whether to jump back into the relationship or let it go entirely. The weight of the decision felt crushing, but he couldn't ignore the truth. He still loved Laura, despite everything. Meanwhile, Laura was grappling with her own guilt and fear. She spent hours reflecting on their marriage, trying to understand where things had gone wrong. One evening, she visited her mother for advice. Her mother, a woman of few words but great wisdom, listened quietly as Laura poured her heart out. "Marriage isn't just about love, Laura," her mother said finally. "It's about commitment, even when things get hard. But commitment goes both ways. If you want Michael to trust you again, you have to show him, not just with words, but with actions." Her mother's words stayed with her, and Laura realized she needed to take concrete steps to rebuild the trust she had broken. She began by focusing on transparency, sharing every detail of her day with Michael, and making herself accountable for her actions. It was a small start, but it was something. The tension between them came to a head during a family outing to the park. They had planned the trip for the kids, hoping to create a sense of normalcy amidst the chaos. At first, things went smoothly. They laughed together, played catch with the kids, and even shared a brief moment of connection when Emma and Jake raced to the swings. But as the day went on, the unresolved tension bubbled to the surface. Michael and Laura sat on a bench, watching the kids play. The conversation started innocently enough, but quickly turned heated when Michael brought up Chris's phone call again. "I just don't understand why he thought there was more to tell me," Michael said, his voice tinged with frustration. "What else could there possibly be?" Laura's expression hardened. "I've told you everything, Michael. I don't know why Chris would say that, but I've been honest with you." Michael shook his head. "How can I believe that when you weren't honest before? Every time I think we're moving forward, something drags us back." The argument escalated, their voices rising until Emma and Jake turned to look at them, confused and concerned. Realizing the impact their fight was having on the kids, they quickly fell silent. The rest of the outing was tense, with both of them lost in their own thoughts. That evening, after the kids were asleep, Michael and Laura sat in the living room, the weight of their argument hanging heavy in the air. Michael spoke first, his voice quiet but firm. "I can't keep living like this, Laura. I want to move forward, but I don't know how to let go of the past. Every time I look at you, I see him." Laura's eyes filled with tears. "I don't see him anymore, Michael. I see you, and I see what I've done to us. I hate myself for it, but I can't change what happened. All I can do is try to make it right." Michael looked at her, his expression unreadable. "How do I know you won't hurt me again?" Laura reached for his hand, her voice trembling with emotion. "Because I've already seen what losing you feels like, and I never want to feel that again. You're my family, Michael. You and the kids are my whole world. Please, just give me a chance to prove it." For the first time in months, Michael felt a flicker of hope. He wanted to believe her, to trust that they could rebuild what had been broken, but he also knew it would take more than words. It would take time, effort, and an unwavering commitment from both of them. In the weeks that followed, Michael and Laura focused on rebuilding their relationship one step at a time. They set aside time each evening to talk openly about their feelings, no matter how difficult the conversations were. They attended therapy sessions together, delving deeper into the root causes of their issues, and slowly, they began to find moments of connection amidst the pain. But the true turning point came during a family dinner. Michael had invited Daniel and his wife over, hoping to create a sense of normalcy. As they laughed and shared stories around the table, Michael caught a glimpse of the life they had once shared, the warmth, the laughter, the love. For the first time, he felt like they were moving toward a future that didn't feel so uncertain. After their guests left, Michael and Laura sat together on the couch, the house quiet around them. Michael turned to Laura, his expression softening. "I want to try," he said simply. "I don't know if I'll ever forget what happened, but I want to forgive. I want us to be a family again." Laura's tears fell freely as she nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes, Michael, I promise." It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. For Michael and Laura, the road ahead was still uncertain, but they were finally walking it together. Thank you for sticking with us as this story reaches its emotional turning point. If this journey has resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the complexities of love, forgiveness, and personal growth. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know what you'd do in Michael or Laura's shoes. Michael and Laura's journey toward healing was far from smooth. But as the months passed, they began to find their footing. The raw pain of the betrayal didn't disappear overnight, but it softened with time, replaced by a cautious optimism. Both of them had learned hard lessons about the fragility of relationships and the effort required to maintain them. Laura continued to show her commitment to rebuilding trust. She was open about her thoughts and feelings, sharing details of her day even when they seemed trivial. Michael, in turn, worked on letting go of his resentment. It wasn't easy, but he began to recognize that holding on to anger only deepened the divide between them. Therapy sessions became less about rehashing the past and more about planning their future. One evening, as they sat together on the back porch, Laura turned to Michael and said, "I know we've been through hell, but I'm grateful we're still here. I know it'll never be the same, but maybe we can build something even better." Michael looked at her, seeing not the woman who had hurt him, but the woman who had stood by him during some of the most challenging moments of his life. "I think we're already doing that," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. The breakthrough came when they decided to take a family trip, a way to reclaim the sense of unity they had lost. They chose a quiet cabin by the lake, a place far removed from the chaos of their everyday lives. The trip was filled with moments of joy and reconnection. Emma and Jake laughed as they skipped stones across the water, and Michael and Laura found themselves smiling at each other more often than they had in years. One evening during the trip, as the kids slept inside, Michael and Laura sat by the fire, the glow of the flames casting warm light on their faces. Michael reached for Laura's hand, a gesture that felt both familiar and new. "I forgive you," he said softly, "not because it's easy, but because I want to. I want us to have a future." Laura's eyes filled with tears as she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. "I promise I'll never take that for granted." The trip marked a turning point in their relationship. It wasn't a magical fix, but it reminded them of why they had fallen in love in the first place. They returned home with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Over time, they began to rediscover the joy in their relationship. They laughed together, shared quiet moments, and leaned on each other in ways they hadn't in years. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer defined their present. They had learned to see each other not as perfect partners, but as flawed individuals trying their best. As the anniversary of the affair approached, Michael and Laura decided to mark the occasion with something symbolic. They planted a tree in their backyard, a tangible reminder of the growth they had experienced together. Standing side by side, they buried the roots and covered them with soil, each silently promising to nurture this new chapter of their lives. In the years that followed, their marriage continued to evolve. There were still challenges, of course, but they faced them together, armed with the lessons they had learned. Michael found himself thinking less about the pain of the past and more about the possibilities of the future. Laura, too, felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. They weren't perfect, but they were stronger. And that was enough. The story of Michael and Laura isn't just about betrayal and forgiveness. It's about the resilience of the human spirit and the power of love to endure even the darkest of times. It's a reminder that relationships are messy, complicated, and often painful, but they're also worth fighting for. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If this story has resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more compelling stories about love, redemption, and personal growth. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder that it's never too late to start over. We'll see you in the next one. And that's how their story ends. Perhaps not with a fairy tale happily ever after, but with something even more meaningful: hope.